I have carried a lot of gear across a lot of cold water in my life, and I can tell you the sea in the far north does not care what you have done or who trained you. It takes the heat out of a man in minutes. It makes the strongest boat feel small. That night, riding low in the dark toward the support ship, I was thinking about the cold and about the platform we were going to take, and I was thinking, if I am honest, about the woman they had put on our manifest at the last hour, the one none of us wanted. Her name on the sheet was Marsh. Evaluator, it said beside it, which told us nothing and told us everything. An evaluator is a person who watches. An evaluator is a clipboard with legs. We were a troop that had trained together for 2 years, that had put doors down in 3 countries, that had buried one of our own the winter before and carried his name stitched inside our kit where the light could not reach it. We did not need a stranger standing behind us with a grease pencil, marking us like a driving test. I was a petty officer then, younger than I am now, and prouder than I had any right to be. I had come up through the schoolhouse the way we all had, through the long gray weeks where good men are broken down and rebuilt into something harder, and I wore that the way some men wear a wristwatch, showing it without meaning to. The instructors who had made me were the closest thing I had to gods. When I did a thing well, I heard their voices. When I did a thing badly, I heard them louder. That lineage was the whole of who I was, and I guarded it like money. So when we came up the ladder onto the support ship, out of the spray and into the wash of red interior light, and I saw her standing apart from the rest of the staff with a plain rucksack at her feet and no rank showing on her kit, I felt the way you feel when someone sits in your seat. She was not tall. She was not young exactly, but she carried herself in a way that made you unsure of her age, still and economical, hands quiet at her sides, watching the deck the way you watch weather. She wore unmarked assaulter's gear, clean but not new, the webbing worn pale at the buckles where 1,000 cinches had passed. She did not look at us the way a rookie looks at operators. She did not look impressed. That should have told me something. It only annoyed me. Chief Bo Vance was our ground force commander, and Vance had a mouth on him that could take paint off a hull. He crossed the deck to her first, because that was Vance, and he looked her up and down the way he looked at everything he intended to own, and he said, loud enough for all of us, "You the babysitter they sent." She let a beat go by, then she said, "I'm Marsh." "I know what the paper says," Vance told her. "I'm asking what you're for." "To watch," she said, "and to help if you want it." That got a laugh out of the troop, a short, ugly one, the kind men make when they have already decided. Help. From her. We were the help. We were what got sent when the situation was past everyone else's hands. The idea that this quiet woman with the worn buckles was going to help us take a gas platform off a crew of armed men in the freezing dark was so far outside what any of us could picture that we did not even bother to be angry about it. We just filed it under nuisance and moved on. I want to be fair to us looking back. We were not cruel men, most of us. We were tired and keyed up and about to do the hardest thing we knew how to do, and the cold does something to your patience. But I was cruel that night, in the small ways that are the easiest to be cruel in, and I have had a long time to sit with it. She bent and picked up her ruck, and I said, before I had decided to, "Water's back with the reserve new fish. Try to keep up." A couple of the others grinned. Marsh looked at me for exactly as long as it takes to measure a man and no longer, and she did not answer, and she went where I pointed. She carried the water. She did not say a word about it, and I told myself that meant I was right. The briefing was in the ship's wardroom, close and hot after the deck, the bulkhead sweating. Our intelligence officer, a lieutenant named Pell, had the platform up on the screen, Marnock Bravo, a gas installation 200 miles out in a sea that has drowned better men than any of us. 9 in the evening, local and armed men had come aboard off 2 fast boats, killed the 2 security contractors on the deck, and taken the crew. 31 souls, Pell said. 31 workers herded into the accommodation module on the lowest working level. Wet men in coveralls who had gone to work that morning thinking about nothing worse than the weather. Pell walked us through it the way he always did, careful and flat. The platform was a stack of steel modules bolted onto legs above the water, connected by a maze of gratings and catwalks and internal corridors barely wide enough for a man in kit. There was the production module, the wellhead area, the utilities, the accommodation block where the hostages were, and up top the helideck and the control room. The men who had taken it had strung the corridors with obstacles and had fighters posted at the chokes. Worst of all, Pell said, was the gas. A platform like Marnock Bravo is a bomb that has agreed not to go off. A firefight in the wrong module, a spark near the wrong line, and there would be nothing to rescue. Vance laid out the plan. We would come up the legs on the seaward side out of the wind, gain the lower deck, and push straight in through the production module toward the accommodation block, fast and violent, and have the hostages secured before the men holding them understood we were aboard. It was a Vance plan. It was a hammer. It had worked for him before because Vance was good and because speed hides a lot of sins. I watched Marsh during the brief. She stood at the back with the water still on her shoulder and she watched the screen, and I saw her eyes move across the schematic the way a reader's eyes move across a page they have read before. Not searching, confirming. At one point Pell said the accommodation block had a single point of entry, and I saw her head tilt just slightly, the way you tilt your head at a wrong note. She did not say anything. But she saw something, and I filed that away too, and did nothing with it because I was a fool. When the brief broke, Vance clapped his hands once and the troop moved, and the machine of us began to turn the way it always did, men checking men, magazines seated, radios keyed and answered. It is a beautiful thing when it works, a troop kitting up. Everyone knows his hands. Nobody has to be told. In the middle of that Marsh set the water down where the reserve would find it and began to check her own gear. And she checked it the way the oldest instructors checked gear, without hurry and without a wasted motion, running the back of one finger along the seat of each magazine, pressing each pouch flat, testing the tension on her sling with a small tug, and then a smaller one. I had seen exactly 2 men check gear like that in my life, and both of them had made me, and both of them could have killed me with either hand before I finished my coffee. I did not let myself think about that. I was very good in those years at not thinking about things that would have cost me my certainty. She caught me watching. She did not smile. She said quietly, so only I heard it, "Your seaward push is going to stall at the production module." "Is that in your notes?" I said. "It's in the drawing," she said. "One way into the block means one way the fight funnels. They'll let you into the production floor because they want you in there. The choke's the cross passage past the second compressor. That's where they'll be set. You'll take your casualties in the first 90 seconds, and then you'll be stuck in a steel box with a man down and nowhere to bring fire." I should tell you that she was not lecturing. There was nothing of the show-off in it. She said it the way you'd tell a man his headlight was out. Flat, factual, offered once. And every word of it was correct, and I did not know that yet, and I answered her the way a proud young man answers a truth he is not ready for. "We'll be through the block before they finish blinking," I said. "You just keep your grease pencil dry." She looked at me another moment. Then she nodded, once, as if I had confirmed something she'd suspected, and she went back to her gear, and I went back to mine. And above us the ship turned her nose into the swell and began to run us in toward the platform through a sea the color of a gun. We went off the side into the boats a little after 2 in the morning, into a cold that reached through everything and put its hand flat against your chest. The platform showed first as a smear of light low on the black water, then as a shape, then as the vast ugly cathedral it was. A mountain of steel standing on legs in the sea with the gas flare, guttering somewhere up top like a candle in a church nobody prayed in anymore. The swell lifted the boats and dropped them. Spray came over in sheets and froze where it landed. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing left to say, and because the cold had taken the words out of us. Marsh was in my boat. That was the roster, not a choice. She'd been slotted to move behind the lead element and observe, which suited everyone because it kept her out of the way. She sat where she was put, low, hands loose, and I watched her watch the platform grow, and I noticed she was not looking at the deck we were going to climb to. She was looking above it, tracking the catwalks and the module faces the way a man reads the high ground before a fight in the hills. I did not understand it. I understood it later, when it was almost too late. We came in under the seaward legs where the wind was broken, and the boats kissed the steel, and the climb began. If you have never gone up the leg of an offshore platform in the dark in winter, I cannot fully give it to you. The metal is so cold it burns. The whole structure hums and groans with the sea working at it. Your kit drags you down, and the spray tries to peel you off, and every rung is wet, and there is a great deal of black water underneath you that would kill you in 4 minutes if you fell into it. We went up anyway, because that is the job, one man and then the next, quiet as we could be over the noise of the sea, and we gained the lower deck without a shot, and for a few minutes it looked like Vance's hammer was going to work. I remember the smell when we came in off the deck into the first module, machine oil and salt, and the flat mineral smell of the gas, and under it the smell of men who had been aboard too long and afraid. We flowed in the way we had 1,000 times, stacked and smooth, Vance up front where he liked to be, the troop pouring through behind him into the production module toward the cross passage that would take us to the block. It was going right. It was going exactly the way he'd drawn it. And Marsh's voice came low over the net, not urgent, just clear, the first time most of the troop had heard it. "Lead, this is Marsh. Hold at the second compressor. Do not enter the cross passage." Vance did not hold. Why would he? He was Beau Vance, and we were 9 seconds from the hostages, and some evaluator with a grease pencil was telling him to stop with the door in reach. "Push," Vance said. "Push, push." And the cross passage past the second compressor lit up. Continuing the story, say continue, or it auto-resumes, and I'll pick up exactly at the firefight in the cross passage and run straight through to the reveal, and the close continue. The men in there had done exactly what she said they would do. They had let us into the production floor because they wanted us in it. They had a machine gun set at the far end of the cross passage, low, behind a welded plate they dragged in off the deck, and they had the whole length of that steel corridor sighted. And when Vance's lead element pushed into it, they opened up, and the sound in that enclosed space was like being inside a struck bell. Rounds came down the passage and off the bulkheads, and there was nowhere to go, because a cross passage is a box, and we were in the box, and they were the ones holding the lid. I saw a man go down ahead of me. It was Petey Ockhaffer, who had a wife and a daughter he called Bug, and he went down hard in the mouth of the passage with his legs still in the production module, and he did not get back up on his own. Another man, Rays, took a round through the meat of the shoulder and spun into the compressor housing and stayed there, cursing steadily in 2 languages. The troop's fire went out and did nothing, because the gunner was behind steel and low, and our angles were wrong. And the more we fired, the more the ricochets came back at us off the close bulkheads, and somewhere in the back of my head, a cold, small voice was saying, "She told you. She told you the choke was the cross passage past the second compressor," and I hated that voice, and it was right. Vance was pinned at the near corner of the passage with Ockhaffer's boots almost touching him, and I watched something happen to Vance that I had never seen happen to him. He froze. Not from cowardice. I want to be clear about that, because Vance was many things, but he was not a coward. He froze because the plan had been the whole of his mind, and the plan was dead on the deck in front of him, and he had nothing behind it. He'd built a hammer, and the hammer had shattered on the first blow, and there was no second tool in his hand. He shouted for suppressing fire, and we gave it, and it did nothing. He shouted for a frag, and Pell's voice cut over the net sharp as a slap. "Negative. Negative on frag, gas hazard. You'll take the whole platform." And Vance had no answer to that, and the gunner kept working the passage, and Ockhaffer was bleeding into the deck plates, and the whole assault, the whole beautiful violent machine of us, was seizing up in real time like an engine with the oil run out. I have thought a great deal since about how fast a thing you are proud of can come apart, 90 seconds. She'd said 90 seconds, it was less. And then Marsh was there. She did not run up shouting. That's the part I keep coming back to. Everything in that module was noise and light and men yelling, and she came up through it from behind the lead element, quiet and low and fast, moving in the gaps the way water moves, and she got a hand on my shoulder and put her mouth close to my ear so I'd hear her under the gunfire, and she said, "Get Akafer by the drag handle, don't stand up, I'll take the corner." And there was something in the flatness of it, the total absence of fear or hurry, that made my body obey her before my pride could object. I got low and got Akafer's drag handle and hauled, and she stepped past me into the corner Vance had frozen in, and she looked once down that passage at the muzzle flash, and she did not flinch, and she keyed the net. "All stations, Marsh, cease fire down the cross passage, cease fire, you're feeding him. Vance, get your element off the mouth of the passage and back behind the second compressor. Now." And this is the thing, Vance did it. I don't know if it was the voice or the fact that nothing else was working or something older than either that a man hears and answers without deciding to. But Vance pulled his element back off the kill zone, and the troops' fire fell off. And for a second there was almost quiet, just the sea and rays cursing and the gunner down the passage firing at nothing now, because we'd stopped giving him targets. "He can't leave that plate," Marsh said, still flat, still low, laying it out for all of us on the net like a woman reading a map aloud. "He's got one gun and one lane, and the second he stops covering that lane, the crew back in the block loses their fence. So we don't fight the lane. Work that grating on the outboard side of the production floor, the one over the pipe run. It goes where?" I looked. There was a section of deck grating, waist-high off the main floor, that ran outboard along a bank of pipes toward the seaward face of the module. I had walked past it without seeing it. I said, "Utilities, I think. Runs behind the compressors." "It runs behind him," she said. "Every one of these installations has a maintenance crawl behind the compressor bank so the fitters can reach the couplings without shutting the floor. He's set to cover the front door. He is not set to cover his own back, because he doesn't know the deck the way a man who built the doctrine on decks like this knows it. Rourke, you and one other with me. Vance, hold this element right here, keep his eyes forward, put 2 rounds down that lane every 10 seconds so he never doubts you're still coming. Pell, tell me the second anyone moves in the block." And she went outboard toward the grating without waiting to be answered, low and quick, and I want you to understand that at that moment I stopped, entirely and forever, thinking of her as the babysitter. I did not have the whole picture yet. I did not know her name meant anything. But I had just watched a woman walk into a corner that had frozen the hardest man I knew, read a steel maze she had never set foot in like it was printed on the inside of her eyelids, and start taking a dead assault apart and putting it back together, and I did the only intelligent thing I had done all night. I followed her. The crawl behind the compressor bank was exactly where she said it would be. She got the grating up without a sound. She knew how it was pinned. She got her fingers under the right corner first time, and we went into a space barely tall enough to move in, hot from the machinery, loud with it. Black except for the leak of light ahead where the passage was. She moved through it flat and smooth on knees and elbows, faster than a thing that size should move, and Halbrook came behind me, and the gunner up ahead had no idea in the world that the maze had a back door, and that the back door was open. She stopped us short of the light. She put her hand out flat hold. She eased forward the last little way and looked, and she came back and put her mouth to my ear and Halbrook's in turn, and she laid it out so simply a child could have followed it. One gunner on the plate, one feeder beside him, a third man back and left covering the approach to the block with a rifle. She would take the 2 on the gun. Halbrook would take the man covering the block left side on her shot. I would push through into the passage the instant they were down and get eyes on the block door so nothing came out of it. 3 sentences. No wasted word. She held up 3 fingers, folded one, folded the next, and on the third. I have been in a lot of rooms since. I have never seen one taken cleaner. She came up out of that crawlway into the back of the choke, and it was over almost before it started. Two precise reports so close together they were nearly one sound. The gunner and his feeder down over the plate they thought made them safe, and Halbrook's man dropping in the same breath, and me coming up through into the passage with my rifle already on the blocked door, and the corridor that had eaten our assault 90 seconds into the fight was suddenly, absolutely ours. The machine gun sat there silent behind its stupid welded plate, pointed the wrong way. At the front door, nobody was going to use now. "Vance," she said on the net, not loud, "cross passage is clear. Bring your element up. Slow. We do the block by the book now, and the book says nobody dies in there tonight." And Vance, I heard it in his voice, the thing that had happened to him, the freezing, letting go. Vance said, "Copy. Coming up. You've got the ground, Marsh." Which from Beau Vance was a thing I had never once heard him say to any man alive. "You've got the ground." She had it. She ran the block the way I have spent the rest of my career trying to run rooms. The accommodation module was the hard problem. The one entrance Pell had flagged, 31 hostages inside, and at least 4 armed men in there with them who now knew we were aboard and would be deciding in the next 60 seconds whether to die holding those men or die killing them first. A hammer would have gotten everyone killed. Speed alone would have gotten everyone killed. What she did was worse for the men holding it and better for everyone else. She went slow, and she went smart, and she made every second count against them. She had Pell talk to her about the block's construction while we staged, and she used it. She knew there was a second void behind the module's inner bulkhead where the wiring ran, because she knew installations like this the way I know my own hands, and she had Halbrook and 2 others open a way into it quietly with the tools off Halbrook's kit, cutting where the noise of the platform's own machinery would swallow the sound. She put the main element on the single door to hold the holders' eyes and their guns, the obvious threat, the thing they were braced for. And while every man inside that block stared at the door waiting for us to come through it like animals, she took 2 of us in through the wall they had forgotten they had. We came into the accommodation block through its own bones. There was a moment in that wiring void, pressed flat in the dark with the platform groaning around us, and the hostage's fear coming through the thin steel like heat off a stove, where I understood something about her that I have never fully been able to say to anyone since. She was not brave the way Vance was brave, loud and forward and daring the world to stop him. She was brave the way a surgeon is brave. She had taken all the fear out of the thing by knowing it completely. There was nothing in that block she had not already accounted for, and so there was nothing in it left to be afraid of, and her calm came down the line to Halbrook and me like a current and made us better than we were. She read the room through a gap in the paneling before we ever entered it. She whispered it to us the way the old instructors used to whisper the whole of a problem into your ear so it lived in your body instead of your notebook. The 4 men, where each one stood, which one was steady and which one was coming apart, the 31 workers on the deck against the far bulkhead, wet and gray and holding each other, one older man among them with his arm around a young one who could not stop shaking. The steady man was the danger. The one coming apart was more dangerous still, because a frightened man with a rifle among unarmed men is the worst thing in the world, and she knew it, and she planned around him first. When she moved, it was without a wasted inch. We came out of the wall on the flank the 4 of them had turned their backs to, because their guns were all on the door where the main element was making just enough noise to hold them, and she took the 2 nearest before either understood the geometry had changed, and Halbrook took the frightened one at the instant he began to turn toward the hostages, and I took the last, and it was done, and not one round had gone anywhere near the men against the bulkhead. 31 workers. She had built the entire thing, the wall, the diversion, the flank, the order of the shots, so that the men we had come 200 miles across a killing sea to save never had a rifle pointed at them at all. Not one. She'd made their safety the first rule of the math and then solved everything else around it. The older worker with his arm around the shaking young one looked up at us in the sudden quiet, and he did not cheer, and he did not weep. He just looked at her somehow out of all of us, though she wore no more rank than the rest, and he said in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had been waiting all night to die, "Are we all right now?" And she crouched down to his level, and she put a hand on his shoulder the way you'd steady a man on ice, and she said, "You're all right now, all of you. We're going to walk you out." And I watched the fear go out of 31 men at once, like a tide going out, because a woman they had never met told them they were all right in a voice that left no room to doubt it. We had the platform in another 20 minutes. There was one holdout up near the control room, and she took the same care with him she'd taken with everything. No rush, no wasted man. A slow, clean squeeze that ended with him giving up rather than dying, because she'd left him a way to give up on purpose. 31 hostages recovered. 2 of our men wounded and both of them going home. Akafar lost a good deal of blood, but the corpsman got to him, because she'd cleared the lane that had pinned him, and Reyes would work a stiff shoulder for the rest of his life and never stop telling the story. 0 hostages lost. 0. On a gas platform in the dark, in a fight that had come apart in the first 90 seconds and should by every right have ended with a burning rig and a lot of dead men in the sea. Vance found her on the Helidic as the first gray came into the east and the extraction birds beaten low over the water. He stood in front of her for a long moment, this big, loud, proud man, and the whole troop was watching and none of us breathed. And Vance took off his glove and he put out his bare hand and he said, "I don't know who you are, but I froze in that passage and you didn't, and every man on this deck is alive because of it. So whatever the paper says you are, I was wrong." She took his hand. She didn't make him say more. She said, "You've got a good troop, Chief. They just needed the deck read for them once." And that was all. No lecture, no reckoning demanded. She gave him back his dignity in the same breath she'd saved his life, and I think that cost her nothing, and I think it was the most expensive-looking generosity I have ever seen a person perform. I found out who she was on the flight back, and I found out the way you find out the things that change you, sideways, by accident, from someone who assumed you already knew. We were strapped in the back of the bird, the cold finally loosening its grip, Akafar stable on the litter and the noise too much for talk, when Pell leaned across to me with his tablet and the after-action already open, because Pell could not stop working if you paid him to, and he pointed at the personnel line and said something I couldn't hear over the rotors. I put my head close. He said it again. "You know who that is, right, Marsh?" I said I didn't. "Evaluator," I said, "some staff billet." Pell looked at me like I'd told him I didn't know which end of the rifle the round came out of. He scrolled, and he turned the tablet so I could see it, and there was her service record, and there was her name, Master Chief Della Marsh, and there beside it, in the flat language of the Navy that does not know how to be impressed by anything, was the rest of it. Call sign of record, Whetstone. And under that, the assignments, going back and back, and I read them with the cold coming up my spine in a way the sea had never managed. She had written it. The close quarters maritime assault doctrine, the one we trained on, the one that had lived in my hands since I was a boot, the sequence and the geometry and the principles I'd have said were as old as the sea itself. She had written it. Her name was on the manual, and before that, for 11 years, she had run the schoolhouse cadre, the instructors. The gray-faced gods who had broken me down and built me back up, the 2 men whose voices I heard when I did a thing well and louder when I did it badly, the lineage I wore like a wristwatch and guarded like money, she had trained them. She had made the men who made me. Whetstone, because that is the stone you draw the blade across to give it its edge, and every edge in that troop, mine included, had been ground on her. She had stood on our support ship and let Vance ask her what she was for. She had let me hand her the water and call her new fish and tell her to keep up. She had carried it 200 miles without a word and set it down where the reserve would find it. And then she had walked into a corner that froze the hardest man I knew and saved every one of our lives without ever once raising her voice or reaching for the thing that would have ended the argument in a sentence. She could have flattened me on that deck with her name. She never used it. She just did the work and let the work be the answer, the way she must have taught 1,000 men to do before there was a me to teach. I looked up from the tablet. She was across the cabin, strapped in, eyes half closed, hands quiet in her lap the way they'd been quiet all night, an old master chief at the end of a long, cold job. And I did a thing I had not planned and could not have stopped. I unbuckled, and I got up in that shaking bird, and I stood, and I brought my hand up to my brow and held it there. She opened her eyes. She looked at me. And she did not wave it off, and she did not look proud, and she did not make it a moment. She looked at me the way an instructor looks at a student who has finally understood the one thing, the whole thing, the thing all the other things were only pointing at, and she nodded once and brought her own hand up and returned it. One by one, down the cabin, the troops saw it. And one by one they unbuckled and stood in that cramped, shuddering space, grabbing the straps for balance, and they saluted her Halbrook, raised with his good arm, men who had laughed the short, ugly laugh on the deck 12 hours before. Vance last of all on his feet, his bare hand at his brow, holding it the longest. She let us hold it. Then she gave a small motion with her hand, sit, before any officer could have, because even now she was thinking of us, of the cold and the litter and men standing in a moving aircraft, and we sat. And she closed her eyes again, and the platform fell away behind us into the gray, and I understood that I had spent my whole proud life standing on ground that a quiet woman had laid down for me before I ever arrived, and that the mark of what she'd built was not that she'd told us so. It was that she never had to. I have taught young men myself in the years since. Hard young men, proud the way I was proud, sure the way I was sure. And when one of them looks at some quiet soul on the edge of the deck and decides in a glance that he already knows what they're worth, I tell him the only thing I learned that was worth the cold. The one who carries the water without a word, I tell him, is very often the one who taught the men you worship how to stand. Read the deck before you decide who's on it. And if you ever get to salute someone who ground the edge you've been cutting with your whole life and never once told you, you hold it. You hold it until she tells you to sit down.